to Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market stock indices were down today, with Chinese markets still short for the Lunar New Year. MSCI's index for emerging market shares fell 0.3% on the day. Now, on the continent, South Africa's JSE down on the back of a combination of a weaker rand as well as softer commodity prices today. Banks and retailers also faring the worst today. In Nigeria, energy firm Forte Oil up 10% on the day, boosting the all-share index. That, of course, is following news that it plans to sell its power unit to its major investor, billionaire Femi Otedele, and that's after it failed to secure a deal via a public tender. That's GTP and Zenith Bank also topping the gainers list today. Now, here's a look at what's coming up on the show. President Cyril Ramaphosa delivers his second State of the Nation address. Deep political divisions cloud Somalia's entry into the oil and gas industry. And UK Prime Minister makes some headway in breaking that Brexit deadlock. Well, let's start off the show in South Africa, where President Cyril Ramaphosa is delivering his second State of the Nation address in Cape Town. Now, Ramaphosa has pledged his commitment to fighting corruption as well as reforming state enterprises. During the past year, he said his administration has revived key investments in industrial parks. He also expressed confidence that the ailing mining sector is set for revival, and that's after key policy changes. He announced a team to review policies that are an impediment to investment. The president has set a target to have South Africa amongst Africa's top destinations for investment in the next 3 years. Well, let's get some insight into today's State of the Nation address from Angelo Coppola. He joins us now in Johannesburg. Great to have you on the show, Angelo. Now, it's been about a year since President Ramaphosa took on that top job. He also promised a new dawn in the country. Let's take a look at a year later, what the country is like. It is out of recession, but growth still remaining sluggish. Unemployment still at record highs. So, Angelo, how did the president address these realities in the country today?
Well, Uche, he was very upbeat at the start of his presentation. He talked about watching the space. He mentioned that theme several times. He talked about the fact that there was meaningful progress that had been made and that people were more upbeat about the country and the economy and about the social environment. He says the issue around policy uncertainty and direction had been addressed, and that they would continue, that is the government, would continue to engage people who were concerned about the way that policy was moving or about any uncertainty. In terms of the mining policy, he says that had been dealt with. Talking about tourism visas, he says that's been looked at, and they're planning to be to introduce an e-visa at some point during the course of the year. He also mentioned port and rail electricity prices being looked at. He did speak about the signing of the amended competition law, which is supposed to flatten the environment so that new entrants can come in and compete against the incumbents. So that was quite a big deal. In terms of SARS, he said that a lot of progress had been made there, and that a panel had in fact been established and announced today that will look at a new SARS commission, because that's important from a revenue collection point of view. On the issue of cabinet and government size, Ramaphosa did mention that in just one line. He didn't provide any detail, but it is one of the biggest issues facing that ratings agencies have, and that's the size of that bloated state. In terms of reconfiguring it, Ramaphosa said that that was at an advanced stage but would provide no more details. On the upside, of course, the president did confirm that some $5 billion worth of foreign direct investment had come into South Africa in the first 3 quarters of 2018. So an upbeat report back, and he's still talking, so we're expecting to hear more news a little later, Uche.
Well, Angelo, in terms of the country's investment grade, we know that South Africa has been able to avoid a junk status. Moody's actually changed its outlook to stable from negative in March. But the debt load of especially the state-owned enterprises, they continue to remain a key risk going forward. So how is President Ramaphosa planning to tackle this issue? And especially a key question is, does the country have enough funds to address it?
Well, look, at the point of us coming on air, he hadn't mentioned any details around Eskom. That's the big one. He says, and we know that there are plans in place. Eskom has a debt load of around $30 billion US, and it's likely to increase before it actually starts coming down. Ramaphosa has a task team evaluating the Eskom board strategy there. We anticipated him talking about the road ahead tonight. At the time of coming on air, we hadn't heard anything yet. Initially on the table is the fact that they plan to break up the utility into 3 areas. Privatization was probably on the table as well. But like SAA, selling a stake to the private sector would mean selling control of SAA or Eskom to the private sector. And it's something that the government doesn't appear to have that much of an appetite for. The country also doesn't have money to continue bailing out these ailing SOEs. It's relied on providing guarantees. And if those guarantees were used, then the government would have to find the cash to give it back to the bank. So those are the big SOEs. On SAA, there is a business plan and turnaround plan in place there, but they did need a cash injection of around 5 million rand to keep it going until the end of the financial year. The problem there is there's no turnaround happening as quickly as everybody wants. So we're still stuck with that serious state-owned entity debt load.
Well, as you mentioned, Angelo, President Ramaphosa, he has had some success, as you mentioned, reforms in state companies, implementing new rules in the mining sector, boosting FDI in the country. He also raised the minimum wage in South Africa. So are South Africans confident and happy with his plan so far? And does it seem like his hands are tied by politics in the ANC in terms of achieving what he wants to achieve in the country?
Well, Uche, the big fly in the ointment here, of course, is around corruption and the fact that there have been no prosecutions in the last 12 months since he started speaking, because it was one of his big issues. And he mentioned it this evening, but he didn't go into any detail. So we need to see prosecutions of those who bribed and those who were bribed or paid the bribes. South Africans aren't convinced that he's done enough on that front. There are 3 commissions of inquiry underway, as you know, looking at the issues, at PIC, at state capture generally, and then the third one is with SARS. And that's likely to colour perceptions because there's been no action. The fact that current allegations have also been made against 2 sitting government ministers doesn't bode well either in terms of political support. Analysts suggest that the pro-Zuma faction is still in play and the pro-Ramaphosa faction or slate is hard at work shoring up support for the incumbent. Uche?
Well, do stay with us, Angelo, as we tackle another top story coming out of South Africa. Total has discovered a new oil and gas region in the country. The new field has an estimated volume of about 1 billion barrels. Now, the French energy giant's significant gas condensate discovery is on the Brulpadda prospects off the southern coast of the country. The finding could be enough to supply South African refineries for almost 4 years. Africa as a whole has seen an increase in drilling, with oil and gas rigs around the continent topping 100 in recent months. Now, Total holds about 45% stake in the block, alongside with Qatari, Canadian and South African firms. It now plans to acquire a 3D seismic data before drilling as many as 4 more exploration wells add, of course, that license. Well, let's go back to Angelo in Johannesburg for more on this new find in the country. Now, Angelo, South Africa's Oil and Gas Alliance says that the country has never seen a find of this scale before, which of course could be huge for the country that of course is mostly an importer. Give us a sense, Angelo, of how this discovery could transform South Africa's oil and gas sector.
Well, Uche, South Africa doesn't really have an oil and gas sector yet. There's been some development work done. There's been some exploration work offshore for gas and a move towards fracking in the Karoo area, which appears to have stalled in the meantime. The upside, if the find is confirmed, is huge. It's going to see the oil and gas sector created almost overnight. Coastal cities are likely to develop, as will those special economic zones that the President was talking about earlier. and they'll get a much needed boost from international businesses who are focused on the oil and gas sector. And as they jockey for contracts and business premises, so we'll see revenue and we'll see FDI flowing into the country. The revenue for the government coffers in terms of tax is going to run into billions of dollars in the next decade or so. So there's a big upside. For the long-suffering consumers, fuel price fluctuations could be a thing of the past if that promised oil deposit meets those expectations, which here.
Now, we know the country recently made a decision to separate oil and gas from mining legislation. In fact, the Mineral Resources Minister, Gwede Mantashe, said that a new bill was in the works. Is there any update on this?
Well, look, that new bill has been in the works for years now, and it didn't help that there have been 3 different mineral resources ministers adding their own interpretations to that combination bill in the last 5 years or so. Mantashe confirmed this morning, in fact, that his department had been working very hard to get a draft separate bill, or the 2 draft separate bills, finalized. It appears he wants this to happen during the next sitting of Parliament. It's an ambitious target, but Mantashe more or less delivered on his first promise to get the mining charter adopted within months of taking office and taking over that portfolio. So we're likely to see a draft oil and gas bill, the separate ones, in place before the end of 2019.
Now, according to Total, the oil firm, this new discovery could open up the possibility of several other discoveries, including light oil. What are the prospects?
Well, look, in their announcement, the senior VP responsible for exploration appeared very confident and confirmed that they plan to drill 4 more exploration wells under that current license. That's the license that uncovered the Brupada discovery. So 4 exploration wells is a huge commitment. So clearly the research and the data and the test drills are providing some good indicators. We'll have to wait for Total to disclose the finds and details as they happen. So it's good news in the long term for the country and for the fuel and gas consumers. And of course, let's not forget the big FDI injection that will precede any oil flowing into the country.
Well, many thanks for your insights, Angelo. Of course, that was Angelo Coppola joining us there in Johannesburg. Well, let's move on now to Sudan, where President Omar al-Bashir has lifted the country's ban on Egyptian agricultural products. In March 2017, the northeastern African nation blocked the imports of all Egyptian agricultural commodities into the country. The value of Egyptian exports to Sudan stood at about $550 million in 2018, while Sudanese exports to the North African nation was at about $103 million. Now, Sudan's economy has been mired in crisis despite the lifting of U.S. sanctions 1 year ago. It sharply devalued its currency earlier this month as part of measures to tackle its economic troubles. Well, let's move on now and take a look at our corporate headlines today. A Lagos judge has adjourned the court case between South African telecom firm MTN and Nigerian authorities until March 26 this year. Now, MTN faces Nigeria's Attorney General over a $2 billion tax demand, a claim the mobile operator has said is without merit. The network provider, whose shares crashed in the second half of 2018 when it was slapped with a tax claim and a separate demand that it return $8.1 billion worth of dividends, maintains that its tax affairs are up to date. Meanwhile, JSE-listed Brimstone has said it is reviewing its role in the proposed $353.4 million buyout of dairy firm Clover Industries after facing opposition from an anti-Israel boycott. Now, lobby group Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions SA has threatened a boycott of Clover due to the consortium being led by Israeli-based Central Bottling Company. The consortium called Milco plans to buy and delist Clover. Now, Brimstone has offered to buy 15% stake, while CBC will take a 59.5% stake. Other members of the Milco consortium are Plowshare Investments, which will acquire 10.9%, and IncuBev, which will acquire 8.3%. And U.S. tech giant Facebook has announced plans to open its first content review center in sub-Saharan Africa in the Kenyan capital of Nairobi. The center, which is aimed at boosting its investment across the continent, is expected to employ approximately 100 reviewers by the end of this year. The Facebook Center will be forged in partnership with Sama Source, a digital employer and a leading social enterprise in Kenya. And British travel firm Thomas Cook is conducting a strategic review of its airline as it seeks to find funds to invest more into its hotel business. The company stressed that the review was at an early stage, but it will consider all options, including a sale. Now, news of the potential sale boosted the group's shares by 13% in early trading today. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's head into a short break now. Still to come on the show. Deep political divisions cloud Somalia's entry into the oil and gas industry. And Kenya seeks to tap into unique tourist attractions in the north of the country.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back. Let's head to Somalia now, where deep divisions have emerged amongst the country's leaders over the planned oil and gas conference taking place in London on Thursday. Now, the government says that the planned oil block auction had been put off, but the conference will reveal the legal and regulatory framework. The chair of the Somalia Parliamentary Resource Committee, Yusuf Hussein Mohammed, turned down an invitation to attend the conference. He warned that the auction's interested parties have no legal grounds, as there was no petroleum bill passed and a resource sharing law. Now, in London, Somalis living in the UK organized demonstrations on the sidelines of the conference. The final block delineation is expected to consist of up to 50 blocks, covering a total area of over 173,000 square kilometers. Now, at least 1,000 delegates have converged in Tunisia for the Financing, Investment and Trade in Africa Forum. Key ministers and international investors are deliberating on ways to make intra-Africa trade a success, as well as open up funding to diverse projects on the continent. Adnan Chaushi has more on that story.
Tunisia is hosting the second edition of the Financing, Investment and Trade in Africa Forum. The theme this year revolves around the acceleration of inter-African trade and investment. The high-level event was organized by the Tunisian African Business Council. Participants discussed ways to promote the inter-African trade that currently does not exceed 13%, against trades of over 50% in the other continents.
The development of inter-African trade is facing three important challenges. challenges, namely the promotion of the continent's image, which for a long time has been associated with humanitarian crisis and turmoil in spite of its strong human potential and wealth of resources, the development of regional integration and the promotion of investment.
TABC president indicated that funding, the lack of Tunisian diplomatic representation in Africa, the logistics and transport remain the major problems impeding the development of Tunisian investment in Africa. Bassem Loukil noted that FITA conference also aims to discuss the funding mechanisms of African operators.
The inter-African rapprochement can only be achieved by setting up an important banking network and increasing ANC links to all the African countries. The best growth rates during the past years were recorded in Africa. Developing inter-African exchanges is important so as the added value will be exploited by the African population.
About 3,000 economic operators, 60 speakers and 30 international institutions took part in the forum.
I represent a platform of 25,000 African enterprises and SMEs in 31 countries who are looking for service providers, subcontractors and distributors. TABC and FTA 2019 has brought together Africans' economic actors to present concrete solutions to various difficulties and challenges which are hindering economic growth on the continent.
Experts have presented new alternative funding solutions, development capital, crowdfunding, insurance credit that can complement the African traditional banking offer.
On the occasion of FITA 2019, the Tunisian government has reiterated its commitment to support all programs and projects aimed to step up trade with Africa. Experts assert that the development of investments in this continent with promising prospects can contribute to the creation of jobs for youths and to economic growth. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, let's now head back to Somalia for more on that dispute between leaders over that oil and gas conference in London. And to give us more on that story, we're joined from the ground by Abdulaziz Bilo in Mogadishu. Very welcome to the show, Abdulaziz. Now, let's start, of course, with the reasons behind this dispute. We know that the fact that there's still no legal and regulatory framework in the oil and gas sector is a key part of that division. What are the key discussions going on behind the scenes, Abdulaziz?
Well, Uche, the meeting that is scheduled to take that took place rather today in London has been a controversial topic here of discussion in the past 1 month since the Somali government announced that it's going to hold that summit in London. There was so much talk of it on social media as well as here in Mogadishu and many other Somali towns. Now, what the president of Somalia was today put to task in a session here in Mogadishu to explain why his administration is going ahead with this meeting in London despite so much controversy, so much opposition, especially from the past administrations led by the former presidents. They both have two political parties and they've actually opposed this summit. So what the Somali president is saying is that there's no auctioning of Somali oil and gas. What the Somali government is doing right now is presenting, it's going rather to London to listen to the findings that were to be unveiled by a company known as Spectrum that was given this contract by the former Somali administration here so that it can be able to understand where exactly Somalia has potential in oil and where it has potential in natural gas. So the Somali president is saying that there's no auctioning of the Somali oil, and this will be done in accordance with the law. And you have said there's no regulatory body at this moment in Somalia. So what the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Resources is saying is that they're taking care of this operation from the beginning and that it's going at a gradual stage. So Somalia is looking at 10 to 15 years from now so that it can be able to extract its oil and its natural gas.
Well, Abdulaziz, correct me if I'm wrong, but the government had also argued that this conference was also going to be a platform to reveal its legal and regulatory framework in the oil and gas sector. And a good question is, what framework will they be presenting there if Parliament has not agreed on one yet?
Well, the Deputy Speaker of the Somali Parliament himself is attending this session there in London, so alongside the Minister of Petroleum. So what authorities here in Somalia are saying is that since Parliament has not yet approved the petroleum bill, so as long as it's pending, the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Resources will act as the caretaker body for the Somali oil and gas. So until that bill is ascended to by the President and passed by Parliament, then the Ministry of Petroleum will be the sole guardian of the Somali natural gas and petroleum. But one thing that the Somali government is saying is that there's a framework that the Somali federal government, that is the central government, as well as the regional authorities, they've agreed on the resource sharing formula. So it depends with where the gas will be found and where the petroleum will be found. So there's that mechanism that the federal leaders here in Somalia jointly agreed at the end of 2017, and they're looking forward to that same agreement in order to distribute the oil and the revenue that will be received from the natural gas, if at all it will be found. So we're talking about 206 blocks and potential blocks of oil that will be mostly in southern Somalia and also parts of northern Somalia. But what is being unveiled today in London is the oil blocks. Most of them are in southern Somalia.
As you mentioned, the conference is taking place today, and there were some concerns that Somalis living in the UK could disrupt that event. Has there been any update on the ground as to what's happened at that conference?
Well, Uche, the conference did take place, and shortly before we even came to this live cross, we were listening in to sessions where the Somali Minister of Petroleum as well as the Deputy Parliament Speaker were addressing the participants who gathered at that hotel in London to unveil the analysis and the data that was collected on the Somalia potential of oil and gas reserves here in Somalia. So there was that protest in London. A few people turned out to protest what they're saying, that the government is trying to auction the natural resources of Somalia without a due process of the law. So the President today also here in Mogadishu said that there's no point in using fake news to distort information that is being provided by the government. So the meeting had taken place, and also there was so much confrontation outside the hotel, but none of them made it inside that venue. So the event went on smoothly, and the data was presented. Somali officials did talk there, and also oil companies attended that event, and they're looking at ways that they can come into Somalia to invest in the oil and gas sector.
Well, as always, great to have you on the show, Abdulaziz. Many thanks for that update. That was Abdulaziz Billo joining us in the Somali capital of Mogadishu. Well, let's head to Kenya now, where investors are slowly moving to the north of the country in a bid to take advantage of its unique offerings. Now, Turkana, which has the world's largest desert lake, was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It has kilometers of untouched beachfront property. Well, CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa reports in our continuing special series, Treasures of Turkana.
Turkana County in northern Kenya doesn't feel like your typical holiday destination. For decades, the sweltering heat and dusty roads in this remote region discouraged visitors. But today, 6 flights land at the Lodwar airstrip every day, bringing hundreds of travelers. Some come for work, others to visit friends, and an increasing number are now coming to enjoy the hidden treasures of Turkana.
The biggest attraction site is the lake, the world's largest desert lake, the UNESCO Heritage Lake, which is protected. It has a length of almost 250 kilometers beach length.
In the middle of the lake is an island, Central Island, a national park. Inside the island, there are 3 crater lakes, and inside those crater lakes are flamingos, crocodiles, and the popular tilapia fish. And there's more. Tourists come for the blend of the old and the new. Communities here are still holding on to their culture, while modern comforts are easily available. And for the religious, The Christ the Redeemer statue in the middle of town beckons. It is this contrast that has boosted the local tourism sector.
The current grading in terms of preferred locations, Turkana is coming 3 in Kenya after Mombasa and Mara. And this is something good for a frontier county.
But it isn't enough. Rolf Glow runs the Elias Springs Resort. Visitors to his hotel can enjoy the sandy beaches and nights in modernized huts.
Last time I was in Turkana, I flew over Lake Turkana, so I saw it from above, from the sky. And I said, oh, when I come here next time, I will try to go here. And it's a beautiful place, just beautiful and very warm.
But the hotel never fills up. There have been sporadic bandit attacks in different areas.
Turkana is safe. And of course, the geographical location of Turkana places Turkana in some risks. We border South Sudan, which is volatile. We border Ethiopia. The southern beach is also volatile. We border Uganda.
This, coupled with the poor road infrastructure, has made it hard to attract local and international tourists. But things are slowly changing. The establishment of county governments and the discovery of oil has opened up the region for development. The Kenya government has also named 3 areas as resort cities. It has plans to develop the road infrastructure and build more tourist facilities. Peace-building efforts are ongoing. The changes could draw in more tourists.
The really beauty of Turkana, you face it and you feel it when you are here. When you see the star sky in the night, when you see the beautiful sunsets and sunrises, when you feel the strong wind, the strong waves in the lake, you feel really exposed to the nature.
The treasures of the desert are waiting. The tourism sector in Turkana County continues to grapple with many challenges. Investors, however, hope that Turkana's unique attractions will continue to draw in tourists and aid the growth of this sector. Wilkes Anyabwa, CGTN in Turkana County.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break. Still to come. We find out if the UK Prime Minister is making some headway in breaking the Brexit deadlock, and France protests EU's decision to block Alstom and Siemens merger.
For decades, scientists working here have unearthed the remains of ancient man buried deep underground. But that's not all there is to Kenya's Turkana County. From February 5th, join CGTN's Wilkes Anyabwa for our 6-episode series as she explores the cradle of mankind. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now here's a recap of our top stories this hour. In South Africa, at least 6 people have been killed by a gas explosion in a disused coal mine in the eastern province of Mpumalanga. Now, state broadcaster SABC has reported that several others remain trapped underground. Rescue efforts have been hampered by the dangerously high levels of toxic gas underground. According to the police, several people entered the mine on Wednesday afternoon to steal copper wires that supply electricity for lighting and ventilation when a gas pipe exploded. Copper is often stolen from disused mines in South Africa and sold for scrap. And the government of the Central African Republic has signed a peace deal with 14 armed groups active in the country. The agreement was struck after weeks of talks in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. The dialogue took place under the auspices of the African Union. The government and rebels have expressed optimism over the deal. Now, similar agreements signed in 2014, 2015 and 2017 all broke down. During those talks, the rebels demanded amnesty and to participate in a new inclusive government and joint patrols. And in Tanzania, the judiciary has launched a mobile court system. The launch event in Dar es Salaam was attended by senior officials of the judiciary. President John Magufuli, who launched the project, says this is aimed at ensuring a faster and more efficient delivery of justice to the public. Now, the president also called on the judiciary to ensure that cases are heard and rulings made in time. And a growing number of Algerians are seeking work in Europe to escape low salaries at home. The exodus of doctors, engineers and highly skilled workers is creating a problem for a government which is hoping to engage with its predominantly young electorate. Now, this comes ahead of presidential elections on April 18th. And that's a recap of today's top stories. And on to Brexit now. UK Prime Minister Theresa May visited Brussels to discuss renegotiating the long-anticipated divorce deal. Now, German Chancellor Angela Merkel called for an amicable exit deal without opening up the withdrawal agreement. However, much speculation has been cast with various parties having different opinions on the way forward. Here is more on that story.
European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker has welcomed British Prime Minister Theresa May for talks. The UK leader pleaded with the EU leaders to change the divorce deal she negotiated last year. But a cool handshake for the cameras with Juncker did little to conceal the tension. EU Summit Chair Donald Tusk said on Wednesday that Brexit promoters deserved a special place in hell, a blunt display of frustration in Brussels that drew condemnation from many in Britain. The Parliament in London voted to renegotiate the deal, replacing the provision that some fear could keep British-ruled Northern Ireland under the EU rules indefinitely. Unless Parliament approves a deal, Britain is on course to leave the EU on March 29. EU leaders believe it would be impossible to replace the provision because it required to ensure a no-hard border between Northern Ireland and the EU member Ireland. According to German Chancellor Angela Merkel, Britain and the remaining 27 members of the EU all have an interest for an orderly Brexit.
We want to achieve that as well, but we must protect integrity of EU single market, that is clear. But we do want regulations that are important for our member state Ireland, because we know of the fragility of the relations between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, and the British Parliament is also interested in finding suitable provisions. And I think we can find solutions without reopening the withdrawal agreement. Well, 50 days are short and 50 days are a lot. It depends on how you see it. We all have an interest. I see that with the British Parliament and the British government, with British Prime Minister Theresa May, but with us too, in achieving an orderly exit for Britain, as that is better for all of us.
With no transition arrangement in place, other options could include delaying Brexit, holding a new referendum, or cancelling it altogether, a scenario that many businesses say would be catastrophic for the economy. Nolma Kugu, CGTN.
Well, Jack Parrock now joins us in Brussels with the latest on this Brexit deal. Jack, great to have you on the show. Now, what really is the status of that deal right now? We know the EU Council President Juncker, he maintains that this withdrawal agreement will not be changed. Yet he and May described their talks today on changing that deal as robust but constructive. So what's the latest, Jack, on those talks?
Right, so there was some positivity. There was a slight chink of a change here today, but only an extremely minor one. And that is that the European Union and the UK negotiating teams are going to get back together again to start discussions. That hasn't happened for a while since the deal was agreed, when it was signed off, this big 585-page document that was agreed between the EU and the United Kingdom that was absolutely panned in a vote in January in the European Parliament and got 230 votes, lost by 230 votes. So what they're here to discuss is well, what Theresa May wants is a legally binding agreement to basically time limit this issue of the Irish backstop, as we were hearing there, within the divorce section of the agreement. The European Union and all the member states as well are all saying that it's simply not possible to take that out or to make it time limited. And so while they are agreeing to sit down together, all of those fundamental deadlock issues remain, and we've seen that again today.
Quite right. And we know that the EU will be meeting with May later this month. Also, negotiating teams are set to resume talks. So given all this, Jack, do you expect these talks to really change the increasing probability that we could see the UK leave the EU without an orderly separation agreement?
I think the longer it goes on, most people are assuming that the longer this goes on without a deal, without any change from either side, Theresa May now has this mandate from a series of votes on the deal saying that the Irish backstop needs to be changed. She has to try and get something on that nature. The European Union is simply not moving. The further we go, the more likely no deal could arise. And that would be obviously, it's predicted across the board, apart from some in the UK who favour it, that it would be absolutely catastrophic for the economies of both the European Union and the United Kingdom. Now, interestingly, yesterday, the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, he was in Brussels, and he said the only people that would be responsible for no deal would be the British, because they have the capacity, Theresa May has the capacity to come back to Brussels and ask for an extension to the negotiating period that the EU would more than likely grant if it meant preventing a no deal, and that would mean that basically the ball's in the UK court, and if Theresa May wants to take it to no deal, it will be her fault. That was his opinion anyway.
And even as that stands, we know the UK also will be the biggest loser if we see a no-deal Brexit. But what do EU countries stand to lose if there's no deal?
Well, it's predicted by some that 1 million jobs could be lost within the European Union, 500,000 in the United Kingdom, which would be comparatively worse on the population sort of ratios. But it would be very, very difficult for the United Kingdom. There's a lot of questions about what it would be. One of the main things the questions that are raised are about the people, the Europeans, Union citizens living in the United Kingdom, over 3 million of them, and the million plus British citizens living in the European Union. What would happen to them, what happens to their rights, because that's all enshrined within the withdrawal deal. There's so much to look at, and really, obviously, there's absolutely no precedent to say what would happen, but all economic and political sort of figures in the European Union predict it would be catastrophic.
Right. Well, we're certainly watching. Many thanks for that update, Jack. Jack Parrock joining us there in Brussels. Well, moving on now, the European Union's veto of an Alstom-Siemens rail merger has revived a debate over competition regulations. Now, the proposed tie-up announced in 2017 had been billed as the birth of a European industrial champion that could compete toe-to-toe with US rival Boeing. However, the EU blocked the merger between the French and German firms. The merger had hoped to create a European rail group able to compete worldwide with the industry leader, the China Railroad Rolling Stock Corporation. Now, EU Competition Commissioner Margrethe Vestager, who announced the veto, says her priority is to respect established regulations. In November 2018, EU members agreed on a framework to control foreign investment in strategic sectors.
It is a failure for the European Union, and it is a failure for the European industry. We will react accordingly. Firstly, by proposing, together with our German partner, a transformation of the competition law, because we can see that the competition rules, which were drawn up in the 20th century, which aim to protect consumers above all, do not protect our jobs.
Well, let's head to the U.S. now, where the Trump administration is playing down the impact of newly announced sanctions on the Venezuelan oil company Petróleos de Venezuela and its subsidiaries. But oil industry experts are saying the impact is dramatic and global. Well, CGTN's Daniel Ringes tells us more.
The Trump administration's decision to sanction the state-owned oil company PDVSA is expected to reduce Venezuela's crude output this month by about 300,000 barrels per day to a total of below 800,000 barrels per day. Venezuela can no longer import American naphtha, a product that's needed to dilute Venezuela's heavy crude into a usable fuel.
So these sanctions, there are no exceptions to that ban on the exports from the U.S. to Venezuela of those dilutants. So that's an immediate impact of the sanctions regime. That will also require some shifting of who else can provide those dilutants, and so that will take some time to find some alternative sources.
Years of underinvestment in domestic oil infrastructure has led to over a quarter of Venezuela's crude being shipped to U.S. refineries. The Trump administration is allowing those operations to continue for phase-out periods lasting several months as they begin sourcing from other parts of the world.
There's plenty of supply at sea that's already been paid for, so there's inventories. There's been excess oil. I'm sure many of our friends in the Middle East will be happy to make up the supply as we push down Venezuela's supply.
The U.S. has decided to set up accounts to hold any revenues earned by Venezuela only accessible to Juan Guaido, whom the U.S. recognizes as the interim president of the country.
If you're the Maduro regime in Venezuela, if you're Maduro, you're not going to want to continue to export that oil to the United States if that money is not flowing back to you in the form of revenues. And so it effectively grinds to a halt the flow to the U.S. because there's a disincentive from the Maduro standpoint of continuing to send that oil.
PDVSA is now stopping some tankers from delivering crude contracts that were signed before the new sanctions were announced. In the longer term, though, the US will seek to improve methods of delivering heavy crude from Canada and Mexico. For now, though, crude prices haven't risen dramatically because there are still abundant supplies for US refiners domestically and on international markets. Daniel Ringes, CGTN, Washington.
And moving to India now, a recent survey has shown that the country's unemployment rate has climbed to 6.1%, reaching a 4-decade high. Now, the government says the figures are premature and the official numbers will be announced in March. Here's CGTN's Shweta Bajaj with that report.
This slum is right in the middle of one of Indian capital's wealthiest areas. People who live here work in the vicinity. 21-year-old Abdul Rahim just lost his job. Till a week back, he worked as a cleaner in the fanciest mall that Delhi has to offer. It's only half a kilometer away. Abdul tells me he needs a job badly.
There is so much of a problem to get a job. Even if I got less money, I will take it, because at least then I will learn something.
Abdul Rahim is not alone. India is facing an acute job crisis. According to an official report, India's unemployment rate has climbed to 6.1%. The situation on the ground is also worrisome. According to the report, 18.7% of men in urban India aged between 15 and 29 do not have a job. For women between 15 to 29 years of age in urban India, 27% are without jobs. In a country where more than 50% of the population is under the age of 25, these figures are alarming. Santosh Mehrotra is an economist who specializes in the area of labor studies and unemployment. He says that with a rising education and population, the jobs should have risen at a much higher rate.
It's not that jobs are not growing, it's just that they are not growing as fast as we would like to see them grow. One of the reasons why, even in a situation where jobs are growing and young people are not finding work, The reason is that their education level is not very good, or their skill level is not very good.
What's surprising is that despite the acuteness of the problem, the Modi-led government has refused to deny or acknowledge the report. India will go to elections in 3 months, and in an election year, the numbers are bad news for the Indian leader.
The Indian government has many challenges. It has to create jobs in a world that is already getting used to artificial intelligence. All these boys around me are actually here to get a handful of jobs by the Railway Police Force of India. All of them unemployed.
We
don't have jobs after finishing our education. Our future looks bleak. We try for jobs. Many places have limited vacancies, and the number of people who come for interview are at least double, if not more.
The social impact of unemployment in urban India has already started to show. Crime in New Delhi rose by 6% in 2018. The police department has blamed unemployment and unmet aspirations of the youth as the leading reason. Experts say India needs to go to war with unemployment before it becomes an even bigger crisis. Shweta Bajaj, CGTN, New Delhi, India.
And shifting focus now, here's a look at how commodities performed today. Oil prices steady as, of course, growing expectations that global supply could fall significantly short of demand this year did lend some support to the petrol, to oil. That, of course, was offset by the negative impact of a rise in U.S. inventories. Meanwhile, gold prices trading close to a more than 1 week low today. They were weighed down by a stronger dollar. However, uncertainties around the Sino-U.S. trade spat and, of course, concerns about slowing global growth did support the metal above that key level of 1,300. Let's head into a short break. Still to come. We examine how they turn waste into beautiful paved stones in Niger.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Well, we're going to Niger now. The country has recently launched a waste recovery unit to turn tons of waste into cobblestones. Now, these cobblestones now allow or help the country to arrange the public spaces or the streets of the Nigerian capital. Here's CGTN's Terry Wangari with more.
It is through the NGO Waste Management and Recovery GVD Africa that the operation of waste collection and processing is organized in the city of Niamey. More than 1,000 tons of garbage is picked up daily in the Nigerian capital. According to the initiators, the transformation of waste into cobblestones makes it possible to find a more ecological alternative to cement and concrete.
La déclic de l'ONG date de 1999.
The trigger dates from 1999. The idea was to see what can be made from waste. The idea of taking the garbage, then take them somewhere to be buried. It was necessary to leave this traditional method and to see how to constitute a source of income, to answer a social need in terms of material products, or in terms of energy or agricultural inputs.
By transforming the waste into other types of products, it allows the recovering of the waste in nature. It allows us to clean up our environment and give farmland back to producers, pastures to livestock producers, because there is a lot of degraded land due to plastic.
The process of turning waste into cobblestones begins with the mixing of plastic and sand in a furnace heated above 150 degrees Celsius. This mixture is then poured into molds to form the cobblestones. In the capital Niamey, many praise the virtues of this initiative. Today, there are several waste recovery units in Niger and in several countries of the sub-region. In Niamey, young people are even trained in recovery techniques to perpetuate the concept. The NGO GVD Africa, for its part, is currently working on the development of other products based on recycled waste, such as slabs for toilets, gutters, and latrines. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
And in Tanzania, a local tech company has created a 24-hour SMS helpline. Now, it is expected to benefit hundreds of students in the country. What's being called the Mtabe system uses artificial intelligence and SMS tech to deliver educational content to students who cannot afford textbooks or the internet. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with the story.
A 24-hour helpline. That is every student's dream. Students that need educational help here can get it through Mtabe, an award-winning edutech solution created by Given Edwards.
What they do is they simply text that question the same way they would message a friend, and then Mtabe, the system, would answer them. And we have a team of teachers here who help answer those questions so students can get a personal tutor at home without having to struggle much.
Given has won the Best Social Innovation from Africa Award, and he's also received a 2018 European Youth Award. His Mtabe team is composed of educators, developers, and entrepreneurs.
Where teachers want to interchange.
After months of hard work that the developers have put into this app, the real test is when it's brought into classrooms like this one across Tanzania. Now students here are getting gripped into its function.
Only 30% of secondary students in Tanzania have access to e-learning platforms. Mtabe aims to ensure that the remaining 70% are not left out. Over 1,500 students at this school have been using Mtabe. Their teachers are happy with the results.
The whole country, that is the whole regions, is urban areas, in the rural areas, if possible. This system is supposed to be introduced to them and to be used as a tool towards the learning and teaching.
Despite the Tanzanian government having a free education policy for primary and secondary school students, the availability of teachers and learning materials is still a challenge. So Given wants to take his system nationwide.
The overall goal for us is to develop world-class secondary school students. That's the overall goal. So everything we do is to develop world-class secondary school students.
As Given sets his eyes on the upcoming global competitions, he hopes that it will bring him closer to what he believes is his life's mission. That's helping students in rural Africa to enjoy e-learning just as much as those in the cities and towns who have internet. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
And before we go, let's check in on Africa's currencies today. Nigeria's naira firming up against the dollar this week as we saw foreign investors buying more naira to participate in a treasury auction. That, of course, boosted dollar liquidity on the market. Now, the naira was trading at around 361 per dollar on the over-the-counter market, strengthening from about 363 last week. At currency bureaus, we saw it quoted at around 361 per dollar and 306.2 on the official market, of course supported by the central bank. Meanwhile, South Africa's rand mildly weaker, trading at a one-week low to the dollar. Of course, some pressure is coming from risk-off trade in the market due to ongoing concerns about the US-China trade war. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.